How's it going, everyone? So today we're going to go over how to purchase a new generator for your use. And I'm going to go over a couple things. How to pick, I don't want to say the brand or anything, but a decent one. I also am going to go over general wattage. I'm also going to go over some common, I don't want to say fails, but misconceptions about a generator and their wattage and everything. And they give you two, so I'm going to explain that. That's going to be towards the end, so make sure to follow that one because that one's very important. I'm talking to you. Watch it to the end because if you don't, you very well might be something that's underpowered. First things first, why do you need a generator? Well, you need one for either work purposes or backup power. So either one, perfectly fine. We're going to have this one as a candidate because it is kind of deceiving in my opinion, but let's go ahead and continue. So basically, we need to figure out what you're using it for. If it's for home use, are you going to use it for something simple like lighting, maybe a couple 1500 watt heaters just to get you through, or are you using it for your fridge, your freezer, heaters, lights, TVs, stuff like that? Well, it's going to be a little bit of a difference. If you are going to be using it for simple things, then all you need to do is get something that's not an inverter. Don't get me wrong, you can get an inverter, it's completely fine. That's what this is. This is an EU2000i. I stands for inverter. So what's that? Inverter is basically a fancy word of saying it gives you clean power. It's more advanced, more technical. It's not it's a little bit newer technology. It's not as, I don't want to say robust, but you know, it just gives you a much cleaner output, something to be very, very similar to what you get out of your wall, just connected to your house. The other types, while excellent, don't necessarily give you as clean a power. They give you probably more abundance of power for the price, just not as clean. That's why I'm saying if you have something simple, the other style, and you'll know because you're paying for an inverter style. Basically, let's say you have two identical machines, 2500 watts. Inverter, you're definitely going to be spending a little bit more. And the other type, you very well might get something called a dual fuel. You'll get this, you'll get that, you'll get a whole kinds of stuff. And the price will be like $300 cheaper. And that's just an estimate. It's just going to be cheaper. The reason why that is because those delicate electronics like TVs, newer refrigerators, newer freezers, cell phone chargers, stuff like that, they, while can run on it, they're a little bit more susceptible to the dirtiness of the power. I'm not going to get into why it's considered dirty. That's beyond the point of this video. Let's just say that it's not the same quality of power as you would get from your usual utility company. Now that's not to say that those other types are not good. They have their purpose and they're great. In fact, I have a video explaining the difference in what you should be doing. So if you don't know that, you should check out that video. That way you can get a little bit more clear of an understanding. Now, having said that, there is a couple different ways to go about figuring out what type of generator you want. Now, I'm not going to say a name, but Honda's a very good one. There's a lots of good ones. What you want to stay away from are like those no-name brands or ones that if you were to Google don't necessarily have a whole lot of history. They very well might be fine, but you're going to want to stick to, like, in my opinion, stuff like Honda, maybe Westinghouse, even like Champion or stuff like that. It's probably okay. But what you don't want to really get into are, like I said, those little no-name brands. If you're getting a non-inverter style, it's probably fine. I mean, Predator is a good example of this. I mean, while not new, they're not known for their generators. They're just known for general small engine equipment. And they're also known for a little bit of a cheaper end as well. So my point is if you get a pretty good name, the reason why it's a good name is because you're probably buying a bit of a product in a situation, especially when you're out of power and maybe you need it for a medical device or something. Do you really want to take that risk? I'd wager no. So what you need to do is, now we know the name, you're going to get a decent name. It doesn't have to be Honda because those are expensive, but just get a decent name. You're going to go to a website and you're going to type in, or excuse me, you're going to go to Google or whatever your search engine of choice. If you're practically homicidal, use Bing, whatever. Anyway, so you're going to type in generator watt calculator, and throughout the page it's listed. It's going to give you a calculator, and it's going to give you a general number. Now this is a general roadmap of what you want. So if you're going to be doing, like I said, just a few lights, your refrigerator, so on and so forth, it'll give you like a checkbox list, or it will at least tell you what the general wattage is. If you really want to be thorough, you just go over to every single piece of equipment that you're going to be powering, and you look at the wattage rating. It should be somewhere on there. If it's not, then if you Google it, it should tell you. But in general, it is going to give you a pretty good understanding of what you're going to need. So you check everything in. Let's say it says you need 4,000. Pretty modest amount. You do not want to get only 4,000. In my opinion, you should probably be looking at closer to 5. You don't want to run these generators, especially an inverter generator, or even the other style generators, at full load all the time. You can. You're just going to run into potential issues, and it's just not a good idea to run something at full capacity all the time. So in that case, I'd recommend doing maybe 1,000 watts more. If you only need 1,500, well, you don't need an additional 1,000 watts. Maybe you only need 500. So go a little bit more. I would say about 20% is a healthy range. Now, if you need like 10,000 watts, well, that 20% now turns into 12K, and that can be a little bit of a difference in price. However, like I said, you get what you pay for. So now, you now know, let's say you need a 4,000 watt generator. You're going to be powering some TVs and your computer and your kids, I don't know, Nintendo Wii or something. You're going to look at an inverter generator, hands down. Don't want to worry about any of that, so just get an inverter generator. Now you have the same 4,000 watts, but your freezer is from the 1940s. It could practically be ran on potato power. It doesn't matter. You can get whatever 5,000 watt generator you want. It will be perfectly fine. So we now know you need a 5,000 watt generator of a decent name. Now this is the tricky part. Output is a little complicated, not for the quality, but for like the outlets, and not even necessarily the outlets. I'm going to go over something at the end that's going to be kind of trips people up a little bit, but you want to, if you are running multiple devices, you can get something called a breakout cord. Basically, if you have a 240 outlet on your generator, for reference, this does not, but if you have a 240 watt outlet, you can get a cord, and then that cord branches off into separate 110 outlets, and it's a pretty good idea, especially if you want to limit the cables. If you're going to be connecting this to your house, you need a 240 watt outlet. So depending on your purpose, you're going to want to see if you need that outlet or if you do not. If you're only going to be running a couple things, remember those PSAs you get from like your local fire department, your water bill, or whatever you get them from, saying don't overload your extension cord. Well, the exact same thing happens with generators. You don't want to overload one outlet. So on this one, for instance, it has 2. Now, somewhere on there, it should say if it is. You can kind of tell by what you have going on here. This is a single breaker. That means while you may have 2 outlets, you only have 1 breaker. So it is a good idea to use both outlets if you're going to be connecting multiple things. However, you do have to realize you don't want to overload that breaker as well. Now, if you have multiple breakers, that means your generator has multiple, let's say, lines. And technically they're called circuits, but for the ease and convenience, you have 2 lines of power. That's good. That means you can run both of them equally at, let's say, the 4,000. You could put 2,000 watts on each and be perfectly fine. What you don't want to do is be lazy, and you'll know because usually the outlet just sits right above or below or somewhere close by the breaker. If you don't know what a breaker is, it's this little thing that just kind of pops out. That's a breaker. It will pop out when it becomes overloaded. Now, what you don't want to do is overload that one. So you want to be careful. So power output, it can be a little tricky. Just look at your connections, what you have. Usually the 240 is pretty more robust. Both of those, for instance, in order to get that 240, it will use both of those circuits, and it's pretty robust, like I mentioned. So if you have a 240, use a breakout cord, more likely than not, you can run pretty much anything. That's why you have to have it for your house. Power output, we now know, and general information on how to connect it. A couple other things to pay attention to. Do you have a 12 volt? 12 volts mainly just for like charging batteries and stuff like that. That's completely fine. Do you have an eco mode? Eco mode means it's usually a switch somewhere on there. If you switch it on, your engine speed will go down. Going down means a couple things. Your power output will go down. However, if you're not using it, it won't actually be engaged. So your engine speed goes down, saving fuel. That can be important. Let's say, you're using it to run a coffee maker or some nonsense, and the coffee maker's done. You don't want it running for 15 minutes while you're plugging in your toaster to make breakfast. So you're going to want it to idle down to save some fuel. That's a good thing. Not all of them have it, but it is a kind of a good feature to look for if that is going to really make or break a generator sale. No, not really. Unless you get in a bad habit of idling all day, in which case, yeah, it might be a good idea. But in general, if yours doesn't have it, you're not really going to miss out on a whole lot. It's just kind of a cost-saving convenience, let's say that. So, a couple things to look for. One final little piece about, actually I'm going to say that to the end. So like I said, watch it to the end. Here comes the real, not scam, but hard to understand for a lot of people aspect of generators. There's something called a surge watt and a running watt. Surge watt means when you turn something on, it usually requires more wattage to get running, and which is normal. Almost everything does that. In fact, I don't know of a single electric motor that doesn't. But kind of like your car, in order to get it moving from stopped, you need a little bit more power. But once you're running, you're able to kind of use less power of the engine. Same exact thing with the electric motor. You have surge and running watts. What you need to pay attention to primarily is the running watts, not the surge. Surge, while yes, is important, it's going to be more important to pay attention to the running watts. And this is the hard part. You're going to hear names like blah 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 5000, EU 2000i. You're going to hear numbers and you're instantly going to think, oh, well, that's, in this case, 2000 watts of power. Well, that's pretty good. That is the surge wattage of this machine. That is not the running wattage. If you were to look at this up in the manual or online, it's going to tell you it's 1600 running watts. So what does that mean? That means after something turns on, it could bump it up to 2000 watts. Let's say you have whatever machine that takes exactly 2000 watts. You can run it for like a second or two, but then after that, it's going to overload this machine. So if you were looking for a machine that needed, or a generator that would actually run a full 2000 watts continuously, or running, as you would say, this is not going to be it. This is going to be underpowered. You're going to pop a breaker. You're going to be running it, you're going to be wondering, why do I constantly have to be pushing in that breaker? Well, that's the reason why, because the naming is a little confusing. Kind of, I mean, for instance, I was helping a gentleman purchase one, and he bought a, I don't know, something or other 5000, because he needed about 5000 watts. And well, yeah, it was it was 5000 watt rated for surge. It actually was only, I think it was 45 or 4400 running watts. It wasn't quite enough, and he was really pushing it to the very max, which is kind of the reason why you want to keep that 10% or minimum more for your wattage. You want to keep it within, because at that point in time, even if you make the mistake and get a machine that's a little under wattage, you're probably going to be okay, depending on the overage, of course. But pay attention to that. Not all the machines will tell you on this side. You're going to want to look it up. Like, I don't think anywhere on this machine it says 1600. You have to look it up in the manual. So be careful on that one. Running and surging are very different. You want to pay attention to the running watts, and that is the one you want to pay attention to. For those of you who paid attention and actually did watch it to the end, I'm going to give you a couple bonus tips on this. You're going to come up with a couple of additional things. You're going to, every machine kind of uses a different name for this or whatnot, but you can link these machines together and many other machines as long as you have the same type and the same wattage most of the time by getting a special cable. So if you have two of these, you can have 3200 watts by connecting them together, and that actually has two circuits as well. I don't necessarily think that cable's super needed, especially since you're not going to be running all that wattage through one outlet and just have another machine. I mean, you could, but it's just not a good idea. So, in my opinion, that's not necessarily a gimmick, but it can be done, and it could be useful in certain circumstances, but just realize that's not going to be too important. Something that is also important, we got done talking about running and surge watts, but there's also something called dual fuel. Dual fuel is basically you run a propane or natural gas or something like that, or gasoline. Those are a little bit more expensive, but if you don't live in an area that's cold, at least in my area, you can't get propane pumped if it's under freezing. Maybe your area is different, but in my area you can't. But let's say it's over freezing and you don't feel like spending gas. For instance, propane I think is like $3 what is a gallon for at my local station. Fuel is $3.05 at my local station. Now someone might say that's a better deal because while not much cheaper, it's going to be cheaper. Yes and no. Here's the problem with that. Propane is less energy dense, and there will be people out there, I don't know why, but they will say it's not true because someone somewhere had an old Ford that they put propane on and they got like 40 miles to the gallon and they had just as much power. That's a bunch of crap. Don't listen to it. It doesn't work that same way with generators. You're going to have a propane rated watt or load or a rating, and you're going to have a gasoline rating. Gasoline's going to be higher. We're not going to get into diesel. Diesel is exactly the same thing, except you're never going to really find one with propane. I mean, it would be interesting to see a fogger machine, but anyway, you're going to see dual. Whenever you see dual and you run it on propane, you're going to be losing power. So when you see, usually they have it in blue letters, because propane is usually just written in blue. The wattage, that is the wattage you're going to get for propane. Let's say, for instance, this was dual fuel, and it says, if it were to say somewhere on this machine, 16 running, 2000 surge, and then you look down, wherever it might be, and then all of a sudden it said 1200 running and 1600 surge. That is because that was what you're going to be able to get out of it running propane. Is there any benefit of running propane? No, not really, unless you have access to propane or it's cheaper, something like that. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything. I personally don't think it's really useful. Now, if you do have a dedicated line for like natural gas or propane or a very large tank, then yeah, you can definitely have a benefit for it. But at the same time, if your calculator says you need 4,000 watts, you need to make sure that this generator can do 4,000 watts, not 4,000 gasoline watts. Because if your plan was to run this on propane at the gasoline wattage, you're going to be underpowered, and yet again, your engine speed is going to start dropping. You're going to start running into problems because it just doesn't have the power to to provide the electricity that you're needing. So if you are going to run something like that, make sure that you pay attention to that propane wattage, and you make sure the running propane wattage is what you need, not the gasoline, not the surge, running propane wattage. I wanted to bring this up because this is actually my personal machine that I sold, and then somebody took it home and told me that I kept popping breakers. I asked them what they were plugging in, and they were plugging in the full 2,000 watts. And I informed them, no, that's not how that works. And they were under the impression it was a full 2,000 watts, just like majority of people that have these machines. But maybe there's some out there that are, but not this one. This one is 16. So I was nice. I gave him his money back. I have the machine back. I'm probably just going to keep it because I don't want to deal with the selling it. And now it's mine again. But I wanted to bring it up because that can happen often. And if you're in an emergency, you don't want to run into having to figure out what machine don't I need to run, when you should be able to run all if you just spent a few minutes watching this video. I'm talking to you and got the proper machine. So I'm going to go ahead and leave you at that. Follow me on Instagram as Mullingen101. If you like what you see, keep watching. Definitely subscribe. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. If this helped you out, leave a thumbs up. That definitely helps me out. I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good night.